I would like to welcome Dr. Larry Rosen. Thank you so much for being in here. Because Dr. Rosen is really, the international, at least they say this about you, the international expert in the psychology of technology. And we're going to dive deeper into that. And he is a professor emeritus at the Department of Psychology at California State University, Dominguez Hills, and a research psychologist for the past 30 years or something like that. You were really before internet, I know you have a book even on MySpace. And so you've really seen this entire development. And I was listening to your talks this morning and how you said, when radio came out and the way it started impacting people in a mass level to what was it, 30 years or something like that.
Yeah, now we see websites like TikTok or Instagram or games like Angry Birds, all reaching the magic number of 50 million people in a matter of days.
That's amazing. I heard you say that about Angry Birds, which is, by the way, I believe it's a Finnish game. So I'm from Finland. So that's really coming from my country. But things are moving this fast. They are moving so fast. So I'm so glad that you really done the research into this on multitasking and social networking, and being also expert in child and adolescent development and parenting and educational psychology. So you're bringing all that to us today. And Dr. Rosen is author of 7 books, I believe, right? Am I missing? Busy. And you can find, we'll drop the link later on if you're interested in those books, but you can find them on his website. But some of the ones that I've looked into is The Distracted Mind and the iDisorder that I find fascinating. Dr. Rosen is also being invited as a commentator in a lot of media, 60 Minutes, CNN, NPR, and all these things, which is why I'm so grateful to have you here with us today. And he also writes some articles and blogs for Huffington Post and Psychology Today and the National Psychologist as well. So did I miss out anything important?
No, I'm wondering if I'm retired, what am I doing all this stuff?
All right.
We didn't mention, by the way, that I'm running for my local elementary school board too at the same time.
That too. You are creating, that's like creating this both and, a lot of both and. But you know what? I think it is when you have a passion for something, you just go for it, right? You just go for it. So welcome. And I am your host, Paula Ketzula. I am a licensed clinical social worker. I have a private practice here in San Diego, California. I work with a lot of kids and families for the past 20 years in this field. And recently moving more towards doing shows like this, events like this. I did the Becoming Peaceful Parents Summit earlier in the year, which was amazing. Got to meet Dr. Danielle Siegel, Dr. Laura Markham, Miguel Ruiz Jr., and all these amazing people as well. So this is kind of my new passion as well, and I love to be able to be in service. So let's dive right in. Welcome those of you who just joined us. Please write your name, ages of your children, and where you're calling from in the chat so that we can get to all your answers. I want to begin with a little bit of an overview, kind of what happened from the initial time of internet. And I remember the Nokia phone that was this big, and we were really growing up playing in the woods and being connected to each other. And now we live, and especially in this pandemic time, I think there is been really an increase in screen time and kids exposed to screens. And what I'm seeing also is these extreme responses of anger, aggression, violence even erupts when parents try to set up limits. So can you give us a little synopsis of what is going on in here?
Well, you when you introduced me, you said that I'd been doing this coming in with the computers, and I actually started before laptops, before desktops. I started studying this in 1984, and have been doing research in this area since then. I love to speak to parents. It's one of my enjoyable activities. I travel all over the country speaking, and when they bring me, they usually want me to speak to parents, but I also insist I talk to the teachers, and I insist that I talk to the kids. And talking to the kids is actually the most fun I have. I love talking to middle school and high school kids because they really get it. When I start talking about what's going on in their brains, they really do understand and they get it. And I hear a lot about that later. By the way, that's Dodger Stadium behind me. I'm a diehard Dodger fan, and yes, they are in the World Series. And as my oldest son said, since the next game starts on Tuesday, he said, I hope my fingernails will start growing back by Tuesday, because it was a nail biter all the way.
My goodness, yes.
So my interest all along has been the psychological impact of technology. But for the last, I'd say, half a decade to a decade, I've been really interested in what's going on with kids, teens, tweens, and adults with smartphones, because we don't even talk about the smartphone as being a phone anymore. It's just in the name we give it. The smartphone is really a computer, and we carry it in our pocket. Well, actually, it's a lot of things. It's a computer. It's a phone. It's a camera. It's our music. It's everything. It's all the things combined into one, which I suspect Steve Jobs would be very proud of if he were still with us. But I'm really interested in what we do with our smartphones. And so I've been looking at this primarily with teenagers and with millennials so far. It's very hard to do this kind of research with younger kids, but I have interviewed a lot of parents about this with younger kids. And I've actually worked with my 2 of my 5 grandchildren who are 7 and 8, who were home last school year. And by the end of the school year, their mother had it. She was frazzled. And so we took them. We said, we'll take them. We'll take them for, 3 or 4 days.
Bless your hearts.
And we will get them caught up because they were so far behind. And we did. But we did it with a trick. And I'll share that with you before I get questions. The trick is school goes from about 30 to 2:30 or whatever range in there. And the kids assume, and the parents assume, that school is going to be from 8:30 to 2:30, that it's going to be that big chunk of time. And a lot of that time is spent by the kids doing things on their own, doing assignments. Even the 7 and 8-year-olds were doing assignments. They were writing things. They were doing all sorts of things with their iPads. And instead of making them sit from 8:30 to 2:30, what we did is we broke the day up into modules. I asked little Mikey, who's 7, to tell me which pieces he needed to do today and how long he thought it was going to take. And he's pretty good at guessing, actually. And I asked Evan also the same thing. And so what we did is we said, okay, we're going to make a deal. You guys work on one module, and their modules were usually about 15, 20 minutes, and we'll let you have 10 minutes on your iPads. And they went, wow, that's amazing. Now, that's only 10 minutes that I gave them. I didn't give them an hour or half hour. They know that they can do a lot in 10 minutes. And so we would set an alarm for 10 minutes. And when the alarm went off, they'd close their iPad and move back up to wherever they were logging on, often with the same iPad. And they were happy. And we caught up with like 3.5 days worth of work and did 3.5 days more. And there were no tears and no tantrums. So
Wow.
There are ways to do this without ending up hating your school, your kids, everything. If you have to distance learn, if you have to do online learning. Know that kids are young. I did look, and looks like there's kids. You have kids between 2, 3, and maybe young teenagers. And I think that they're all involved with technology. Some you like, some you don't, some too early, maybe a little bit. But there's no rules. This is part of the problem with this. There are no rules. You get to make up the rules as negotiated with your kids. By the way, I'm a behaviorist, which means that I believe in positive reinforcement and a form of punishment, but not like we would talk about punishment, but a form of punishment, which I can talk about if you want to hear more. But you can modify somebody's behavior, even your own, by positively reinforcing things that you want them to do, and punishing, trying to decrease the frequency of things that you don't want them to do. And I liberally sprinkle it a lot with a lot of hugs and doing a great job and positive feedback. Sometimes when the boys were pretty far behind, we had to develop what's called a star chart, a behavior chart. And we would list all the behaviors that they should do when they're obviously online for school. We'd list all the behaviors that they should do. And every day, so we started 3 times a day, but we ended up with 2 times a day. So every day after lunch and after dinner, just before bedtime, we would sit them down and go through the charts. Actually, they were on the refrigerator. So we'd go over the refrigerator, look at the charts, and I'd say, Mikey, how good a job did you do staying focused on your modules today? And he'd go, well, I think I did a pretty good job today, Grandpa. And I said, okay, you get a star for that. And then we went through each one every day there were 4 or 5 positive behaviors we wanted them to exhibit. Including, by the way, some other behaviors that had nothing to do with technology, like when you're told, go brush your teeth and get ready for bed. That does nothing to do with technology, but it does have to do with kids' behavior. And what we had them do is we had them say, what kind of things would you like to do with your stars? And we set up a little store. And we said 5 stars gets this, 10 stars gets this, 15 stars gets this. And we kind of went through the whole game. But it's funny, it didn't matter. What they really wanted was extra time on their gadgets. They wanted more time to play Minecraft. They wanted to play, they're very heavy into Fortnite. And so X number of stars would turn in for X number of minutes. So they would get extra time, or they also liked having a little bit later bedtime too. Those were the 2 most popular things that they did. So I'm primarily a researcher, primarily a parenting teacher, primarily a parent. I have 4 kids ranging from, I'm not even going to tell you, but the youngest one is 30 and the oldest is 45, I think now, which by my count makes me about 70, which is true. I just love working with kids and parents. It's just always been fun for me. It's always been interesting because every parent is different, every kid is different, and every parent-kid relationship is very different. And so I enjoy trying to think about things that you tell me and what it might mean in terms of maybe being able to enact change, or maybe suggesting that you try some things and see what works better. So that's the short and long of it. I welcome questions. I look forward to talking to you.
Great, thank you so much. And I'm glad that you said, like, there really aren't any cookie cutter answers to these things, that everything is like so individualized, like kind of depending on the kids and the family and the background of the child and the age and all these things. So one big question that I always get is like, what's too much screen time? Like, where is the cutoff? Like, where should we draw the line? And could you speak into that? And then after that, if you could give us a brief summary about what's happening in the brain and what's happening in the body during screen time, and why is that of concern? Is it of concern? Are there any good things that are coming out of that? And then we're going to jump into those questions.
Okay, so I'm going to split this up in sort of youngins and then little older ones that are on social media, because they're a different ballgame.
Different, yeah.
For the young ones, interestingly enough, the American Academy of Pediatrics always used to say loudly that no screen time before the age of 2, and they meant all screens. Now, I can't imagine my grandkids going without television, first of all, and that's a screen, or going without playing a little bit of Fortnite every day. So American Academy of Pediatrics recognized that, and they changed their guidelines, but I still don't think they're right. I think the guidelines should be based on what happens in your brain. So I'm going to kludge both of these together here.
Great.
When you are using technology, several things happen, or several things might happen. I'm sure you've heard the term that my kids are addicted to technology. They're addicted to games. And what that means is, in the brain, when they play a game or they use their technology, they're getting a squirt probably of a chemical called dopamine, which gives them a feeling of pleasure. But the next time they play or are on, if they're on, say, for 45 minutes or a half hour, say, The next time, instead of a half hour making them feel good, they're going to need a half hour plus maybe another 10 minutes, because it's going to take longer to play to get that same squirt of dopamine. And pretty soon they are addicted. And that means they're going to try to find any single time they can play those games to get that squirt of dopamine to feel better. What happens when they don't get a squirt of dopamine? What happens when we don't let them play? Well, one of the most things is...
Oh, let's see. Let me mute this one. Okay, there we go.
I muted. I always get my dog barking in the background. So.
Oh yeah, me too.
Anyway, when they're not allowed to play screens, particularly the older ones now, the older ones who are on social media, but also the littler ones too, they get stressed. It makes them stressed. There's lots of research on this. And the stress is shown by some chemicals in the brain, the most prominent of which is called cortisol. Cortisol is a chemical in your brain that wakes you up. When you wake up in the morning and you got a little bit of cortisol in your brain, and as you start opening your eyes and seeing things around you, maybe looking out at the sky, you get more and more cortisol, and you get a level that makes you function during the day. If you get scared about something, you get a rush of cortisol, just a rapid rush of cortisol. And you also get the bodily symptoms. Your fingers, your palms are sweaty. You're sweating under your pits here. Your brain goes blank, all sorts of symptoms of anxiety. And that's really what it is. And anxiety is not an addiction, not an indicator of an addiction. It's called an obsession. And what that means is it's a little different than the addiction, where with the addiction, you need to do more and more to get the same pleasure. With obsession, you need to do something to get rid of those chemicals like cortisol. So if what's making you anxious, say you're an adult, what's making you anxious is you haven't checked in to see if you got any email lately, or you haven't checked in to see you're on Facebook and you haven't checked in to see Facebook lately. That might make you anxious. And the thing you want to do then is go to Facebook to stop the anxiety. So these two things play in our brain back and forth all day long. And I look at it as a continuum between addiction on one side and obsession on the other. And at any given time, you're somewhere between there. If you're playing a game, you're really addicted. If you're really anxious about something, then you're really stressed and obsessed. And we slide across sometimes within minutes of each other. But what that means is you need to recognize these two systems that are important to understand with your kids, and understand with yourselves too, quite honestly, because you will, when you ponder these things, you will find out that you are probably contributing on some way to the things your kids are feeling. So with that said, you have to split the little ones off from the big ones. So how much time is good for the little ones? I recommend no more, by the way, than 30 minutes at a shot, because by 30 minutes, they're really engaged and they're really trying to do something fun. The most want to play games. And so they're getting that dopamine and they need to do more and more. So I recommend 30 minutes at a shot and a big timeout after that to do something else. With little ones, 30 minutes a day may be enough. Maybe you want to give 30 minutes a day and then do something else for 3 hours and then come back to another 30 minutes. Or you might want to give stars and make them earn another 30 minutes somewhere along the way. There's always ways to do this. With the bigger middle kids and the bigger kids, the tweens and the teens, it's a little different, because right now, particularly now while we're all at home, except some of you may have your kids going back to school. 2 of my grandkids are back to school. 2 are too young to go to school, and 1's homeschooling right now. So, or taking school at home. I understand that's the wrong phrase. Homeschooling means your parent is teaching you with a curriculum. Taking school at home means the teacher is teaching you with a curriculum. So that's the difference. But you might also find that there is somebody's not muted.
Got it. Yes. So make sure that there we go. I think I got everybody muted.
So the tweens and teens are most likely using their technology to communicate with their friends. They are most likely using, if you look at the teens, they're most likely using social media, particularly Instagram and Snapchat. They're most likely using some form of other communication, mostly text messaging. In fact, the 2 most common things that the teens do with their phone is communication, either through text messaging or through games or through some form of social media. So again, you have to set limits, obviously. And the limits, by the way, as for a behaviorist, at least by me, are negotiable. You say, you sit the kids down and you say, okay, you guys, you have, say, a 13 and a 15-year-old. You say, how much time would you like to play on your device, whatever device you want to use? And they'll, of course, say an hour or 2 hours or something outlandish. And then you kind of negotiate. You say, don't you think that's a little long? How would you feel about this? And I try to bargain them down to about an hour at a time. That would be the max I would allow. The research suggests that maybe 90 minutes is okay also. What happens is our brain gets overloaded after a certain amount of time. And so if it's overloaded with all these chemicals going around our brain, we're not going to pay attention to anything but our device. We're not going to pay attention to mom, to dad, to nanny, to anybody at all. We're hooked into the game. And you know that with your kids. When they're hooked into the game, they're hooked in. And so the brain has this thing that after a certain amount of time, it's too overloaded. And you feel the tension in the room. They're getting more anxious about it. And I wish there was like a little red button back here that we could push and reset our brains all of a sudden, kind of wipe it clean, but you can't. So there are lots of activities that science, neuroscience in particular, has shown to be calming of your brain, to get your brain to settle down. Some of those are pretty obvious. Go outside. Go outside and look at the sky. Go outside and collect bugs. Go out, depends on how old they are. Get outside without your technology. 10 minutes, by the way, is enough of this activity. I wouldn't tell your kids that, because I would suggest that if they play 90 minutes, or if they play 30 minutes or 60 minutes or 90 minutes, they have an equal amount of time doing something else without technology. But quite honestly, after 10 minutes of doing something else, their brains are calmed down. They're not going to get upset. They're not going to be screaming at you and yelling and crying and having tantrums. They're going to be fine. But some of the activities that are really good at calming their brain, exercise is one of the best. There's lots of research in kindergartens now where the teachers have the little kids, 5 years old, the little kids, after about 20 minutes or so, maybe of instruction, she has them run around the room, run around, and then on cue, they run backwards and they run forwards and they run across. And just that exercise, just that energy blanks the brain. Another thing that blanks the brain is talking to a friend or talking to a mom or dad, but live, face to face. Another one for the older ones, and this is going to seem a little like an oxymoron, but is listening to music. Listening to their music. Now, they usually will have to have their device to listen to their music, but you have control of the device, which we should talk about. And if they're listening to music, that's all they're going to do is listen to music. And again, those consequences for good behavior and bad behavior, if you need to put them on a star chart. My kids were on star charts from when they were about 7 and 10 until they were about 16 and 18, or 15 and 18. Not because they needed to be, because they loved it. They loved getting the stars. They just loved, they never turned them in for anything, which was very bizarre. They would just compete. They would just compete and go, how many stars do you have, Adam? And Adam would say, start counting. He goes, I have 525 stars. And Kaylee would go, ha, I've got 700 stars. I'm beating you. So the stars, which were reinforcement or leading to reinforcements, now just are reinforcing on their own. So with those kids, again, I would say no more than 60 to 90 minutes at a time, and then about an equal amount doing something else. And that conflicts a little with some of the back to school stuff, the online back to school stuff. I don't know if your kids are back to school part-time, hybrid, no time, all time. My 2 older grandkids are on full-time back to school 5 days a week. And they have been for quite a while. And luckily the school is a private school. And so they were able to put really good filters in and windows that open and spread everybody out and make sure that everybody washed their hands. They actually had, at 11:55, every kid had to go wash their hands. At 12:30, every kid had to go wash their hands. So they really learned quickly how to do all this stuff. They all wore masks. Some of them wore shields if they wanted to. They put plexiglass around their seat so that, again, if they coughed or something, it might not go over the plexiglass. So this school was allowed to do that because they got an exemption from the state because they have so much money. They were very careful. But again, don't give them too much time. Don't let kids sucker you into playing all the time, and don't let them sucker you into going from one screen to another. That's the ploy that they do. Well, all right, I'll stop playing my Fortnite. What's on TV? I want to watch a movie.
Right.
Now I understand the parents don't get enough free time, quite honestly. And I've been a parent. I've been a grandparent. I know that you don't get enough free time. By the end of the day, your free time is, I've had it. I'm exhausted just from trying to keep the kids in tow, trying to do their schooling, trying to help with their homework, whatever. You can build in that kind of free time during their off time too. You can play games with them. You can take a walk with them. And that can be an example of your free time, which is interacting on a much lower, easier, more calm level. So did I cover everything there? I wasn't sure.
You did. Wonderful. I have one burning question, and then we're going to jump into the questions in the chat. But I think this question will also serve parents. So you talk about that anxiety that happens when the child can no longer have access to the screen. So what do you think about these diets, like completely taking a break and like, taking all the screens and electronics away, cold turkey, and then that's it? Like I hear a lot of questions around that and that as a solution, and I'm kind of feeling iffy about it because I know the anxiety and the stress that produces as well. So what's your take on that sort of thing? Like, do you recommend it? Is there a way to do it, how to do it, or just don't do it?
So first of all, psychology has found, if you look at the statistics on National Institute of Mental Health, you will find that 31.1% of teenagers during their teenage years will have some sort of major symptom of anxiety, period. That's about a third.
Right. Yeah.
Anxiety is rampant even with little kids. They get very anxious. And if you say, I'm going to take away, well, a lot of parents do this. You're not listening to me at all. Okay, all your devices are gone for a week, period. Gone for a week.
Right.
Just
You're grounded.
Right.
I
can tell you how many times I was grounded for life in my teens. But that's what teenagers are like, and that's what preteens now are like too. They're growing up much faster, I believe.
Right.
So you can't go through a detox, because that's really what you're doing, is taking everything away and detoxing them, because they're going to fight you. Why? Because of those chemicals running around the brain. They don't want to be anxious. And the way to not be anxious is to get their device back. Mommy, I'll do anything. I'll wash all the dishes. I'll do whatever you want. I just want to play Fortnite. Please, please, please. And then they hang onto your leg and you drag them around and nobody wins. What wins is you create a specific plan with your kids. And the plan mostly revolves around time. You're able to play this game for X amount of time, and then you have to take X amount of time break. That's really the bottom line. You can add in stars if your kids or teens are under. You can make a store that they can buy things from the store with their stars. And by the way, they can buy extra time on their device, because that's a real big reinforcer.
I love that. Yes, I love that idea. And that a lot of the things like you described that they can buy from the store is like also like other activities and time together as a family. And what I also heard you say that I really resonate with is like doing this with the kids. This is not just like telling the kids this is what you're going to do, but it has this element of collaboration, cooperation, kind of working at it together as it's a team effort, creating this win-win situation for everybody. And kids love that when they feel like they are listened to, their opinions matter. And then you do the negotiation, because yes, at the end, you are the parent and you have your bottom line, like this is the limit, but you negotiate to get there. Through this way of collaboration versus, some kind of dictatorship, which that's just going to create resistance. And one of my major concerns right now have been this. I'm like, oh my gosh, what is this doing to attachment? What is this doing to a relationship between parents and children? Like all these battles that are happening. So I'm loving it that you are here really to say like there's hope and there's a way to do this in a way that can be calm and peaceful and everybody feels good about those solutions.
Right. And one of the things that I think, if somebody wants me to go over how to create this whole system, it's very easy, and I can talk you through it in about 5 or 10 minutes. But one of the things that's important is bargaining. I'll give you an old story that involved me. One time my wife and I at the time went to Europe for a week, and we had my parents come and my 2 older kids come to babysit. So they had 4 on 2 at that point. One of their big problems, the little kids' big problems, is they hated vegetables. They hated them. Every night would be a bargain. How many pieces of corn do you want? That was Kaylee's, I think. She liked corn. How many pieces of corn do you want? 15. No, she'd actually start at 2. I only want 2. And then I'd say, how about 20? And she'd say, no, let's go to 5. And we'd go back and forth, and we'd arrive at some number in between, and we'd dutifully count them out and put them on her plate. Did the same thing with Adam with peas. We'd count them out and put them on his plate. I mean, Christopher's my youngest one. Count them out and put it on his plate. And so we came home from our vacation at dinner time, and I looked at their plates, and Kaylee had tons of corn on her plate. Chris had tons of peas on his plate. And I asked my oldest son, how did you get them to do that? He said, Dad, it was easy. I started the bargaining at $1 million.
Oh, smart. Right, very smart.
Well, the whole point of the example is it's a lot about bargaining and letting it be a win-win situation.
Yes.
Parents don't have to win every time. In fact, they shouldn't win every time. They should be able to negotiate with the kids, and that makes the kids happy. If they're listened to, it makes them happy. They know that they're participating in this, and that what they're participating in is their behavior, basically. And they then get to control their behavior.
That is it, right? That the behavioral control comes like this internal intrinsic motivation now, because they've they practice this, and there's this structure. I love that there's this structure around that, and you are totally enrolling me into this behavioral charts and things, which is not necessarily my first go-to thing, but yes, I can absolutely see the benefit in this. In this
By the way,
case.
you can use these behavior charts, as I've used them or taught people how to use them with kids as young as about 3 or 4.
Wow.
And so you can do them with your spouses too, by the way.
Oh, yes. Great idea. That's another Zoom call. Maybe we'll schedule that one too. So let me put this question out there for everybody, because I know you had said you can run us through how to create that. So I want to make sure that I ask the audience, type it in the chat if that would be helpful right now, to kind of go over the steps of how to create that behavior chart and go a little bit more into detail. So Karen says yes. How about anybody else? Let's get a majority vote here going, and we'll make.
One of the things about Zoom is you can vote.
Yes, exactly. I know there is a way to do that, but just type yes in the chat if that's something that would serve you. Okay, Kate says no. There's a couple more yeses. Kate, I wonder if we will bargain with you, and we'll get to your questions first, right after we do this. Anybody else?
Before I do this, anybody have an absolutely pressing question that they would like to get answered first?
I'm
happy to
let's do that.
Who has an important question that they can't, if they'll go crazy if they can't get it answered right now? I understand.
I know, because I felt that earlier. I'm like, okay, I gotta ask this. So whoever with the pressing question, whoever type it in the chat right now, and we'll get that answered. Okay.
Let's see, who's chatting?
Our kids, somebody wrote to me, kids 12 and 14 too old for charts. I don't know. What do you think? Are kids 12 or 14 too old for charts?
Absolutely not. You can do this. In fact, 12 to 14 is a really good age to do this. They're just starting to get sucked into the technology world, particularly at 12 or 11. Most kids get their first phone now at about 11, and they get on social media around 11, even though that's illegal for most social media sites. But yes, you can definitely do it. In fact, I think the optimal age for doing this is between about 10 and 14. That's really the optimal age where they really get it and they really are participatory.
Right, because I know you said you can do this, and there's different way to do it with the younger children, but like cognitive development is kind of going through some changes and phases, like when they get to be like 10 years old, where, you know, they can really get that idea. So I love that there's a way to do that even with older children and younger children. And we have a pressing question from Karen. How do I start to step down my child's screen time? So if it's a situation that the child has been just like, you know, kind of feeling like they're getting too exposed to screen time for too long, like how do you start that process of stepping it down?
I'm sorry, I missed your question. I was actually reading somebody else's question.
So how to start stepping down screen time, like from 2 hour, like if a child is playing a 2 hour block, how do you start like the process of stepping it down a little bit?
So there's two ways to do it. One is to just get it down to what you want, but you'd have to build that star chart or that behavior chart around that. Doing it, or you step it down slowly. If say they're on 2 hours a day and you only want them on an hour a day, then you step it down maybe 15 minutes each day until you get there. Otherwise, if you step it down immediately or turn it all off immediately, the same thing happens. They get very anxious. When will I get back to my game? When will I'll be able to talk to my friends on Fortnite? Yada, yada, yada.
Okay, so do the star chart or 15 minutes at a time. And what do you have? What do you have? Like, okay, let's say like, because what if there's like a huge explosion already? Like even that 15 minutes decrease is gonna cause a huge blow up. What do you have for parents for those situations?
Okay, so again, let's bargain with your kids. With kids, we're going to get down. We need to get you down to about an hour playing at a time, or 60 minutes, or whatever, 30 minutes, or 90 minutes, or whatever you decide is the chunk of time you're willing to let them play the game without having that break after it. Because really, the problem is just playing consistently over and over and over with no breaks. You say, okay, get down there. We're not going to get down there immediately. We're going to go down pieces. I think we should go down a half hour at a time. What do you think? And they'll say 5 minutes at a time. And so then you have this negotiation goes on, and you end up probably at 15 minutes and everybody's happy.
But you start with the million. You start with the 30 minutes or whatever it is. That's great.
The other thing I do want to mention is that you do have to remember that you are the parent. You own the devices. They are yours. And you have options of what to do with them. Having said that, we talked before about yanking them away from people and from your kids and taking them and putting them away. And the only time I recommend doing that is at bedtime. Bedtime is very important to have no devices in the room. And in fact, the National Sleep Foundation suggests no more than that you have to have them out of the room an hour before they go to sleep. Others have sloughed off and said maybe 30 minutes is fine. But the problem is the devices are held right here, right in front of their face. And the devices are powered by light. And the light looks white to you, but it's not. It's a bluish white. And light from the blue spectrum, from the blue wave spectrum, guess what that does? It turns off melatonin, which gets them to go to sleep, and turns on cortisol.
Wow.
So if they're playing with their devices right up to bedtime, yes, they may go to sleep immediately because they're just ramped up and they're just exhausted from the day. But most likely they'll wake up very quickly and have a bad night's sleep. Then this goes for adults too. It took me, I'm very, very much obsessed with my phone and email. And it took me a long time to do this. But finally I realized that I needed to get my phone away from my looking an hour before bedtime. So the first thing I did was I didn't turn it off because my kids sometimes will text me late. They're on the other coast. They have issues, or early they have issues they want to talk over. So I would just turn it upside down and turn the sound off. And I found at the beginning that was very difficult. I was kind of looking over there like, where is it? Well, I haven't heard it beep, but I don't let it beep. And then after about a couple of days, it became very natural. 11 o'clock, usually the news is on or whatever you do at 11 o'clock. You go to sleep at 12, like I do, or whatever, just back it up about a half hour to an hour before and get that away from you.
Great.
Now, in place of that, by the way, for kids, what you really want to do is increase the melatonin and shut off the cortisol. And what does that are a couple of things. One is music. Music is a really good thing, of a really good activity that most likely will turn off the anxiety cortisol and turn on the melatonin again. And particularly music they love. I always tell when I talk to teens, I always tell them, pick a playlist that you can sing in your sleep. And I say, yes, you may have the phone by your bedside because that's where you get your music, but nothing else. And if you have to put it in a box, put it in a box right there so you don't see it. Out of sight, can be out of mind, maybe. The other option is to use settings in your device. The iPhone has something called Night Shift. And Night Shift, if you've ever used Night Shift, it starts with your normal screen blue-white color, and then slowly over the day, wherever you mark the day when you want it to start, it will turn pinker and pinker. And pink light activates the melatonin and turns off the cortisol. I hate the pink light, by the way. It looks terrible. It's hard. I like reading books in my phone in bed, but it's terrible. You can't read a thing. You can't see anything. So other activities, reading a book, reading a paper book is really a good activity for anybody, because if you look at the pages of a paper book, they're not bright white. They're like an off color, like a tan, a warmer color. And that again turns off the cortisol, turns on the melatonin. And then the other thing strangely weird is you can watch TV. Either you can have your kids watch TV or you can watch TV. But again, I recommend that you only watch something or let your kids watch something that they're very familiar with. And the reason that's true is because if they're very familiar with it, then in their brain, they've already encoded all the characters in it. They know who's who. They built a backstory in their brain about who's who and what kind of action happens and what does this and what does that. And so they're using less of their brain, and more of their brain then gets that melatonin and off to sleep. With adults, I always tell adults to watch a rerun. I will watch reruns of Big Bang Theory, which I love. I will watch reruns if I'm not quite tired enough yet. And after a rerun or two, it's like, yeah, I'm tired now.
Yeah, I love that tip of like just watching something familiar so that the brain doesn't start like processing in, like new information right before going to bed. And that's so powerful information also about the blue light and what happens with that.
Can
Go
I
ahead.
give you one more?
Yes,
So
of
the
course.
trick I've not tested, I've developed it on myself. And what I do is I realize that my brain cannot let go of the day. When I get into bed, my brain is buzzing mostly. Lots of ideas, what I just watched, anger at the TV, want to throw my shoe at it, just upset brain, basically. And what I have done is I've picked a snippet of a song that I really like, and I play it over and over and over again in my head. Happens to be Hotel California, the very beginnings of it. And I literally play it over and over. And I can tell if it's not going to work, because another song will break into it. It's like all of a sudden I'm humming something else in my sleep, in my brain, and it's not Hotel California. And if I get back to Hotel California and I wake up in the morning, I usually go, I wonder how many times I actually had to do Hotel California to go to sleep. I only remember 2. So it works for me. I suggest if you're having difficulty sleeping or particularly staying asleep, that's the most difficulty that most people have these days. It's not going to sleep, it's staying asleep at night, kids and adults, because our brains get buzzing and they buzz in the middle of the night.
Yeah, which is also has like negative consequences for the next day, because now our REM cycle is impacted, and we know how important that is. But thank you so much for those tips. I'm going to move on to the next question here, which is, I work with children that come from trauma. Brain research suggests that these kids do not respond to sticker charts, consequences, rewards, etc., as those can increase their anxiety. In addition, emotional development may be around half the chronological age. So any suggestions for that population? So kids with trauma who might not respond to those sticker charts as a child who haven't experienced trauma. So what's your feedback on that?
So my answer is that you have to get creative. You have to try some things that you might not try, including, again, remember that exercise is kind of good for kids to do. So you get them out and you do some exercise. The kids love doing jumping jacks and push-ups or sit-ups or just laughing and doing something fun. And you try to get them rein back. And I agree. I mean, star charts will work a little bit with them, but it's not the action of choice with kids who are have been through trauma or are in special education, particularly. I had a son in special ed, but his problem wasn't that he was deaf. And so we had different issues in dealing with him, but he would have tantrums because he couldn't hear things, but he could see really well. And so he would have terrible tantrums if we didn't let him play his games. Terrible tantrums. And we tried everything until we tried doing something special, which was, hey, let's go take a walk to the store just down the street and buy a dessert. He turned out he loved that. So every day we walked out after a certain time when we wanted him to stop playing video games. He would walk down to the store with us. We'd make it a parent kids outing, and we'd all pick special desserts. But for him, I gave him 2 desserts. Now sugar may not agree with the kids, and if you have a sugar problem with kids, then you let them buy something else that is non-sugar. There's a bunch of, my wife's on a non-sugar diet right now, and there's a bunch of non-sugar things that taste really good. There's some of those ice creams that are non-sugar ice creams that taste to me just like chocolate ice cream. So,
Yeah.
But you have to be very flexible in this. And most special ed teachers I've met are very flexible because the kids are not your normal kids, and they're not going to react in the same way as your normal kid reacts. So you're going to have to kind of be thinking on your feet. And my job, I think, with parents of special ed kids is to arm you with as many tools in your toolbox as I can do. There's no magic tool. And sometimes star charts will work. Sometimes putting stars on their paper that they get, letting them pick the color of the star. Those are all possibilities. I used to buy my kids, they have the silver stars, gold stars, and blue stars. And they were bored with the silver and gold, but boy, you gave them a blue star. They were so happy. And then, of course, you have to follow all of this up with positive reinforcement. Hugs, good words, nice job, positive words, positive behavior from you, heavy duty smiles. Kids get that smile. They understand they just did something to make you smile. So anything you can do to give them something at the time and then make it really stick as a reinforcer. And I can direct you to books and people who know this stuff. But that's the best I can give you, is just arm yourself with as many tricks as you can. Because these are really tricks, by the way. You're really tricking the kid away from the tantrums, away from the upset, into some sort of calmer behavior. And then you can take that calmer behavior and use lots of smiles and lots of positive reinforcement. Great job. Be surprised how far a hug would go. It's amazing to some kids just to give them a hug or just say, wow, you're the best today. You're the most fantastic kid today I've ever seen. You're doing wonderful.
That's positive. That connection piece is so important. So what I'm hearing is flexibility, creativity, and try something new. Like sometimes I kind of feel parents get stuck like trying the same thing over and over again, not working. So get creative. Like you figured out like, okay, now we're going to take a walk and get this, dessert. Like whatever, like almost like doing whatever works, as long as it's something positive to prevent those huge meltdowns with all this cortisol and all the stress response being triggered. And because the truth is, when the stress response is triggered, like the kids won't even learn anything. Like the brain can't learn in that kind of stressful state, right? And yeah, so go ahead. What you were going to say?
Well, I would add, just because a trick or some sort of reinforcement or something doesn't work the first time, don't throw it away. Keep it in your arsenal, keep it in your back pocket. Yeah, I remember when I had little kids and they would have tantrums. My son couldn't hear, and he would tantrum all the time from lack of hearing. And we didn't know he was deaf until he was 2, which is pretty strange, but he was very good peripheral vision, and he tricked us basically. And I would keep a list of my tricks on the refrigerator door. And if something didn't work, I'd go over to the door. Hey, let's try this one. Let's try this one. Let's try this one. But I'd leave them on the door in case I wanted to try it again another day, because those will work sometimes and they won't work other times.
Yeah,
It's not.
I love that.
Anybody who works with kids in this realm will not be surprised by that, because you need to be so flexible with the kids, because you don't know what's in their brain and their behavior, what that means.
Right, exactly. And truly what I talk about, going over the bridge into the world of the child and trying to understand them and what do they need at this moment, and then do the bargaining and negotiation, collaboration, showering with lots of affection and love and all that. I love that. So great. So it is 2 o'clock right now. Do you have a few more minutes or do you have to jump off, Dr. Rosen?
I've got a few more minutes.
Okay.
And what I do want to say, by the way, is if you have a thought later on, email me. I'm
Okay, great.
Rosen, LROSEN, at CSU, California State University, DH, Dominguez Hills, .edu. Just one thing I ask is remind me where you saw me, which is in this Q&A we're having today. And then go ahead and ask your question. I love questions from parents.
Great.
Sometimes you don't know what you want to ask until 3 hours later and you go, oh, darn, I should have asked that question. Feel free to email me. I'm happy to respond, and I respond, because email, unfortunately, is my poison.
We know how to reach you now. This email, he's gonna check it.
The one notification that I don't turn off, well, two, I don't turn off my text message because they're usually for my kids, and I don't turn off my email because I'm addicted to my email.
Yeah, so we shall email you. And if you, I wrote the email in the chat, and if you happen to just lose the email or whatever, you can also email me and I can be the bridge and connect you with Dr. Rosen as well. But I did get a couple questions from people who emailed me ahead of time. So let's go over those. So this one is from Katie. She has the 12 and 14-year-old boys. How do we help them self-regulate their wandering minds and natural distractions within virtual school? Which is, that's a really good question, Katie, because that's one of the things happening right now is kids just can't focus on the Zoom, and the mind is wandering to a lot of things. And the 14-year-old is missing assignments, submitting mediocre work, spending 10 hours a day on his computer stating, I'm doing schoolwork, but not really, because there's tons of other tabs open. And the 12-year-old is watching YouTube on the school-issued Chromebook instead of applying this energy towards his assignments. And Katie is frustrated. And so, yeah, what would you suggest to that situation?
These are the perfect age for a star chart. And having two boys close to the same age, you'll see
competition. Yes.
That's good. Remember, on a star chart, all the behaviors are listed as positive because you want to give them stars for being positive. So I would say one reinforcement that you described from one is paying attention to your schoolwork and not opening up any windows. That's mostly positive with a little negative. Or you could say only opening the windows you need for school. Something like that. You can set limits on them playing their games, and positively reinforce them. Kids, you can use stars. You can use little kids like stickers more than stars. My kids, when they got older, when they got about 12, 14, we stopped buying stars and we just used check marks. Just check marks. They were much easier. And in fact, I had them give themselves check marks. They would eventually go, how good a job did I do today coming to dinner when you called me? Not so good. How good a job did I do taking a shower by myself? Did a great job last night. Okay, give yourself a check. And in fact, sometimes you go, not only give yourself a check, but give yourself a bonus check because you did so well. That's like a little sneaky extra reinforcement.
Yes. And you know what? I forgot to say this earlier, but what I love about the star chart, that the way you are doing it is like the child evaluating, like asking the question so that they evaluate themselves versus saying like,
so they will self-regulate.
Right.
That's exactly getting to the point of part of the question. They will self-regulate in order to get what's on that star chart in that store. Now, if they're still not doing it, your store is not good, and you need to work on getting your store better.
Yeah, you kind of need a bigger carrot or a better carrot for that, so to speak, to motivate that behavior.
Or maybe you decided that it took 10 stars to get 15 extra minutes playing their game. And they're not getting 10 stars. So you go, all right, for this next week, we have a special going on. 5 stars will get you 15 extra minutes.
Oh, you can do specials. I love that. That's great.
You have to turn this into a game because kids love games no matter what they are. And it really is a game. In fact, in the book that I used for teaching behavior modification, was called The Game or the Good Behavior Game. And you should introduce it to your kids as the Good Behavior Game. We're going to play a game, the Good Behavior Game. Here's how. And again, you have to continue to be flexible. I know that it's difficult. It's so tough to be flexible because you're in charge and there's this feeling that you've gotten, and maybe it's through your parents and how they treated you, but someone's the boss and I'm the boss and what I say goes. And if you don't stop that, I'm going to do X, Y, or Z. And then you don't do it. And then they say, but if you just don't stop now, I'm going to do it. Or if you don't stop playing that game, I'm going to take it away for a year. The kids don't understand they're not going to take it away for a year. So you have to remember that this is kind of a bargaining game, and the kids have to win and you have to win. And the way you win is better behavior.
Right. Like we said before, everybody gets to win. And these things are here to stay. You know, the technology, like we kind of started, like everything is now moving faster, happening faster, new tech, like who knows where we are going to be like in a year or even 2 years. So these things are here to stay. So the solution is not also just like completely like cutting kids off from this stuff, but it's rather like learning to manage it and learning to manage in positive ways that doesn't erode the relationship and really like, you know, increase those stress levels and the cortisol and all these things that can be a really negative consequence of this.
So my most recent book is called The Distracted Mind. And it's written half by a neuroscientist from brain point of view and half by me from a behavior point of view. And at the end, we take what we said throughout the first half and second half, and we each take a chapter and say, well, then what does the brain stuff tell you to do to undistract yourself or to get your kids not distracted? What does psychology tell you to do? And we pose suggestions. They're only suggestions. We pose suggestions. Try some of these. And we only pose suggestions that have gotten a thumbs up from science. You can't tell, but I'm reading it, wearing a t-shirt that says, I can't remember, demand evidence and think critically. And I really believe that if you're not trusting science and you're not letting it help you think critically, and you don't have evidence to support anything you're doing, then you're probably not going to succeed. If you have evidence supporting it, and the evidence can even be just somebody like me talking to you and presenting things, or something you read in a book or something you read in a parent magazine, you can use those as evidence as long as they're decent evidence based on data, based on science. And everybody wins. I mean, my goal always has been to make everybody win. And that's, science tells you how to do that.
That's so right. Absolutely. Because I like, we kind of started, you know, the information gives you choices, gives you the power to make the right decisions in these situations, which is why I thank you so much for jumping in on this call today. We're going to wrap up with that. And if there's anybody else who has any other questions, email me or email Dr. Rosen, because he's really here to support you. And I can feel that it's your heart's passion, and really you are close to parents. You've gone through the journey yourself, and right now, oh boy, the parents get to have all the support possible out there. So, which is also a reason why I wanted to put this together. So thank you so much. Any resources you want to share here at the end? Because I know that you are involved in a couple organizations, the Children and Screens. Is that right? Do I remember it correctly?
Children and Screens is an excellent organization. I'm on the scientific board, not the real board, but the scientific board, because I'm a scientist. Children and Screens does a lot of webinars for parents. It's all based on what screens do to children. So we don't talk about anything above a teenager. We don't talk about adults. We give grants to organizations that want to try something out. But we also do a lot of webinars with experts. And 99 times out of 100, the parents will find very important material in those webinars. And they're all posted, even if you don't get to see it live. If you get on the mailing list, they'll pepper you with don't forget that this webinar is coming up tomorrow. Don't worry about it if you can't make it. You just go online a week later and it'll be posted. And there's lots posted on there now. There's a couple other organizations that are good. Common Sense Media is a really good organization. I think it's very valuable. It has good recommendations for toys for kids, movies for kids, any kind of activity that kids will do. And then I would just say, first of all, don't buy any of my books, because the best one for this one for parenting was called Me, My Space and I, Parenting the Net Generation. And that was like, I don't know, 2006 or something. It's like we've gone through 2 major changes since 2006, maybe 3. I wouldn't recommend it anymore, although the ideas in there are still good, but you need something more current. And if you go to Children and Screens and see who the experts are, who they pick, they'll always have either books or places you can go. I write a blog for Psychology Today, not very often, but I do, and it's accessible from my homepage, which is, not surprisingly, drlarryrosen.com. Just drlarryrosen.com, it's short. And I write blogs sometimes about myself, sometimes about kids, sometimes about social media, a little about politics every once in a while, but not much. Right now, I've been spending time writing about my experience with having Parkinson's disease. And I've been writing about what it's like to get the disease, and what you think, and how you process it. And then the most current one is called A Year Later, because I got it, or at least diagnosed, in 2019 in August. And so it's about a year later, and I update people who want to read, see what they think. It's an interesting experience. And I think as a scientist, I can share my experience with people, because I kind of can look at myself internally, but also like a little person standing on my shoulder watching me, and watching all the mistakes I make, the word choices that I blow. I don't have any obvious tremors, you would never know it, but that's medication. But there's a lot of good stuff on there for particularly social media. I talk a lot about social media, talk a lot about attention, multitasking, things like that.
That's another fascinating thing that I was kind of reading also about that, and attention and multitasking, how we actually can multitask. And thank you so much for sharing that with us, and always curious, always investigating even your own experiences and what's happening. And that's so helpful then for many other people going through the similar things. So that's why we kind of get to share our gifts and struggles and good times and bad times with other people, so that other people can really benefit from those as well.
I agree. You should always have a support group.
Yes, exactly. Great. Well,
for parents, a few Parkinson's people for me, it doesn't matter. Just a little support group will help.
So important. Yeah. One of the biggest factors for resiliency. And we need some resiliency right now in this life in general, and especially in the times of COVID-19.
Yep, you bet.
So thank you so much again.
Thank you for having me. It's been a fun time.
Great time. Thank you for taking some extra time to go over some of those extra questions. Thank you for everybody who participated. And if any questions come up, just go ahead, email Dr. Rosen, email me.
Hand clap.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, Kate.
Great. And I'm wishing everybody a wonderful day. May you be safe, may you be happy, may you be healthy, and live with ease. Bye now.